conversation is sacred. It is for the woman who is carrying grief that does not seem to be lessened with time and is finally ready to be met in it instead of asked to just move past it. So I am joined by Mercedes Medina, also known as Merci. She's a grief practitioner, a trauma-informed hypnotherapist, a death doula, and founder of Mourning House, a space for those learning how to live alongside their grief. So after losing her father to suicide at 18, Merci came to understand grief not as a season to survive, but as a lifelong relationship that reshapes every part of life, time, and time again. So through grief support, hypnotherapy, somatic practices, death work, and grief circles, Merci helps people face their grief in an open, honest, unmasked way, making the room for the ugly and complicated parts that the world wants us to hide. So today we are diving into grief as a lifelong relationship, the subconscious mind and the patterns we cannot seem to break, and the unique layered work of losing a father to suicide, a loss I share with Merci, and one that bonds this conversation in a way I could have not planned. So we are talking about how to build a beautiful, meaningful life alongside the loss, not in spite of it. So this conversation is going to be tender, holy, and so deeply needed. So Merci, I'm so honored to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having
me.
Well,
before we dive into my questions that I know my audience is going to love, I would love for you to share just kind of a quick elevator speech too of how you got into these workings. I mean, obviously you have a, huge life event, but just kind of your journey. Also share your human design, your kiddos, just kind of give us a picture of Merci, if you wouldn't mind starting off there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start off with, I have 4 kids aging from, 10 to 1. So we're all over the board as far as, being in mom life and full-time mom mode while also working for corporate. And then I do have Mourning House. As far as how Mourning House started and the reason I started Mourning House is, like you mentioned, I lost my dad to suicide at 18. But prior to that, I experienced a lot of loss growing up. On my mom's side, her parents actually died in a train crash when she was 5, leaving behind 11 kids. And so that grief and that trauma has been in my life at a very young age. So death is around all of us, right? But I just feel the relationship that I've had with death has been very intimate from a very young age. And it wasn't until I lost my dad, that relationship with my grief has just dramatically changed over the past 10 years. And I say 10 because even though he's been gone for longer, it's taken me, a while to learn the evolution of grief, to understand that, hey, what I'm experiencing right now, this is actually grief. It's not just sadness like we're told. So I really leaned into, okay, what does it mean to accept this grief as part of who I am now? And not something that I run away from. So that's what I've been trying to do with Mourning House, is to open the conversation of grief and all the reasons we grieve and all the ways that we express our grief. So yeah, that would be the shortened version of all that I could go into.
Well, let's dive in just a layer deeper. So I want to know, you obviously teach that grief is not a season to survive or just get past, but it is a lifelong relationship that ultimately reshapes every part of your life over and over and over. So that reframe alone is, I think, just radical, because most of the world keeps asking us, when we're going to move on or, be okay again. And so can you walk us through what it actually looks like to be in a relationship with grief and not at war with it, not hiding from it, or not performing, healing for others?
So I'll have to start by saying I lost my dad 18 years ago. Out of those 18 years, it probably took me 15 to actually verbalize how he passed. And for several reasons, I didn't want people to feel sorry for me. And then I also hated the questions, the follow-up questions of why or how, or, those things are so, I open myself to the discussion, but I think there's a lack of understanding how to ask certain questions. So that's why opening myself up to and sharing my story are important, because I recognize that we as a society don't know how to ask certain questions or when the question is appropriate. So learning to build this relationship with grief for me started at being honest with myself as far as, he died by suicide. I have no shame in that anymore. And it was a self shame of like just trying to protect him and his image and, protect myself and him and my family from the stigma of death by suicide. So I feel like that was a big stepping stone for me in the relationship with grief. And once I did that, I felt like the floodgates opened. There was things that I had completely blocked out of my mind and my memory because I just avoided it for so long. And so when I opened that door, I realized, okay, everything's coming out now. And learning to accept that when it came in, letting myself feel how I felt, regardless of how my grief wanted to express itself, has also been very helpful. As a society, we're taught that grief is sadness. We're never taught that grief is also anger. Grief is feeling, apathetic. Grief can feel like depression. Grief can be and show up in so many different ways that is not just sadness. So allowing myself to express all of those feelings, especially the anger. I had such a complicated situation or, relationship with my anger towards my dad, towards the situation. And I would spiral through anger and then guilt. I feel guilty for being angry at somebody who was struggling so much so that he decided to leave this earth. And then I feel like this terrible person who could not understand the depth of his own grief and his mental health. Like that alone killed me. How can I be angry at somebody who was suffering? And then I'd get angry at myself. So it was this vicious cycle until I got to the point that I said, you can live in this world of both. You can be this angry and still have so much love, so much compassion. And it's not that you're angry at him, but even if you are, allow it to come through. And I noticed that the more I allowed myself to be honest without trying to reframe in the moment, I would end up, full circle and come back with more love and just more compassion. And that anger would ease up. So I have noticed that has been the biggest catalyst, is allowing myself the full expression without trying to tone it down, without trying to censor myself. Really just fully embody the way the grief wants to be expressed.
You're bringing up so many emotions for myself. I have felt the same exact way. And I feel like even I'm 5 years, almost 5 years in, and I don't know if you feel like this, but every day I still have to make a decision. Like, which one am I going to show up as? Am I going to show up with anger today, or I'm going to show up with, compassion? And every day is, different. And I think that allowing yourself to feel, though, is like such a big indicator. Like you had mentioned, like people and, the moms, listening, everybody's lost someone. And, there's a question that I was, always circling, wondering like, why am I still, grieving? Like what, it's been, almost 5 years.
I try to gently remind them that this timeline, there's no timeline for grief. There's no timeline for the loss. There's no timeline for how quickly we should get over or move on. The truth is it doesn't exist. That's something that society has told us that we have to follow. But it's funny that to some level, each of us will experience a significant loss. And we're told, you have 3 days of bereavement. Okay, it's been a year now. You should move on. But everybody, all of us behind closed doors are dealing with that same story that we're told and trying to wrap our brains around why we haven't moved on when, this significant amount of time has passed. But the truth is that that's so far out the window. Like, what's wrong with me? Why am I not over it?
We've all dealt with it so differently. And I think just like accepting everybody for how they grieve and how long they grieve. Could you identify like where that anger like really stemmed from? And like what belief did you have to, really confront, to get to that neutrality?
I fully believe that that 18-year-old, whatever was supposed to be in her future, that version of me died right alongside with him. And so the grief of that, of what my life should have looked like, I have anger towards that. But then I look at the life I have now and the kids that I have and my partner, and how could I ever be mad at a future that I didn't know? And, I knew what I wanted. I knew certain things that I wanted to accomplish that I didn't, that died with that dream. But I would never trade what I have now. I can't imagine a life where we're not together. I can't imagine not being here for them. I got to the point where I stopped asking why, because it's not something that I'm supposed to know or to understand. And learning to accept that, I think, has been the hardest in my journey. Releasing the need to know why and just trying to come more from a place of compassion and understanding that multiple truths are valid and present. All these things can be true.
That was so good. I've never really reflected on, grief like that. Is like a part of me definitely died with my dad. And I'm a totally different person than what I even had thought I would ever be. And I think, the root of what you're saying also is, stop asking the why will bring you to the present time.
Yes. It's a hard truth to swallow that we aren't always going to have all of the answers.
And we're not supposed to, for a reason. And if you
We're not
were,
supposed to.
the answer would come to you. You would know. Yeah, that is something hard to really accept. As a trauma informed hypnotherapist, which I love this, you work directly with the subconscious mind, and so much grief, mom guilt, generational pain, and the patterns we can't seem to break live there. So what is actually happening underneath a woman's conscious awareness when she keeps repeating the same emotional pattern, the same fears, the same self-talk, especially after, major losses or in, heightened emotions?
There's so much going on underneath. And so with subconscious work, as you know, a lot of it can be rooted back to our own childhood. And when we have to turn the light on to what is ours to actually carry and what's a story that we have picked up as our own. And so learning to distinguish and differentiate the two, that's part of the work. So acknowledging, hey, this is something that I've done for the past 30 years. This is how I was raised, but I don't want to be this way anymore. Making that choice and then taking the steps to retrain yourself. And a lot of it as moms is not only are we parenting our children, we're reparenting our internal child in the same moment. So we'll notice things that trigger us. And, for instance, myself, when I feel like the kids are really loud and everything's going on and I feel myself starting to lose it, I have to ask myself, okay, why am I so upset in this moment? And realizing that because as a child, I wasn't allowed that same volume and expression. And that kid inside of me is freaking out that she's about to get in trouble, So if we're able to catch that, and then, say I explode, then you feel that mom guilt of, man, I really didn't have to go so hard on them. They're just playing or just being kids. Why am I so triggered by this? And so really just trying to take the small steps back of why am I so bothered? Okay, now I recognize that that's what this is. The internal child is screaming because she feels like she's about to get in trouble. And so we reparent the situation. We have to reparent ourselves before we can be, the mother or the provider that we are wanting to be.
Exactly why I named our podcast Regulating and Raising Kids, because it's basically parenting yourself and, like you said, just still having to show up and parent your kids. So such an amazing input there. What is one practice or a shift a mom, listening today can do to actually begin what softening what her subconscious has been holding on to?
I think it would definitely some tips would definitely be it's not a black and white answer, right? Because every situation's so different, and all as moms we're juggling so many different things, and each ball that we're juggling is so important, and if we drop one, all of them are going to drop. So I think taking small steps and not trying to rechange everything in one sweep is so important because we have to allow ourselves grace. We have to give ourselves grace. And so I would say the best thing or the best way to start to reprogram our subconscious mind is to try to catch ourselves in the moment of thought. So when you feel that sensation of like overwhelm, breathe into it and, okay, what's going on? This is me. This is a me thing, not a them thing. And so separating ourselves from the situation and from the environment, I think is really critical. And I also don't think that we give ourselves enough break time. So like go into the restroom for 5 seconds, take a breath. And then when we're talking to our kids, I found like leveling yourself with them, eye contact, rather than looking down at them, is a reminder of how small they are. They're looking up to us, their little voices. I try to hear their little voices in my head. They're not out here trying to make our lives, more intense or whatever is going on. We're that space for them. So putting ourselves back into that small version, I think really brings us back into the moment of, okay, what do you need? How can I protect you? How can I help you? What are we trying to learn, in this situation? And that's really helpful for our subconscious because we're helping, again, that inner child.
That's the self-care that we need more of. Like not, shopping trips, not wine outings. Like we just need 5-second breath work in the bathroom. Like that is the self-care that we truly need as moms.
Yeah. And honestly, one thing that I have found helpful with my older daughters, and of course this is all age appropriate, is being honest with them. Hey, you know what? I am like on the edge right now. I need a moment to myself. Or what you're doing in this moment is really upsetting to me. And I need you to help me scale it back a bit so that I can re-regulate and try to figure out like internally why I'm so upset in this moment or why I'm so overwhelmed. So sharing that with them too. And then that way they in turn, when they are experiencing their own turmoil, their own chaos, they can say, hey, my mom used to tell me she needs to take a moment. So that's what I'm going to do in this moment is take a moment. And they pick up so quickly, when my 2 older girls are having a disagreement, I hear the way they speak to each other and I'll hear them say, you know what, I just need a moment to think real quick, or I need a moment to feel, this big emotion real quick.
I think honesty is like so crucial. And even for myself, like, when I snap, like, I'm like, hey, sorry, I apologize to my kids. Like, hey, sorry, I snapped at you earlier. Like I was feeling this way. And one thing I want you to know is that I'm working on, regulating my emotions whenever those situations come up. And I think like that has been like so amazing for my daughter and I's relationship because she also struggles with, similar emotions that I have, which your children are a reflection of your own emotions. So that was a very much so, goal moment as well once I learned that. But I think just like showing them like you're a real human being, like you make mistakes, but you're working on getting better. And I think like the turmoil starts whenever the change doesn't happen. But I think it just is like a layer of accountability. Like you don't want to let your kids down, you know what I mean? And you want to, teach them that, it's okay to not be perfect, but also bringing awareness to your emotions and, trying to better yourself, I think is the whole message.
Yes. And you're building, I think when we allow ourselves to have these conversations with our children and we're the first to apologize for, overreacting or, blowing up, it's so important that we rebuild that trust and we keep that trust with our children from a young age, because then they're also learning in real time how to handle conflict resolution and how to communicate better with each other. Because as humans, conflict is inevitable, even if it's in or with somebody that we love, but it's in how we repair that situation that we're teaching them. And we're learning this in real time because I don't know about you, but feelings and conflict resolution is not something that I learned, growing up because my parents didn't know that either. So we're all learning this in real
And I
time.
think like for you and I, like knowing that, mental health is an area that we, have been heavily affected by, like talking to my kids about that. Like, hey, how's that little voice in your head? Like, making them aware that they have an inner voice and making them aware that they have the control of that inner voice and how nice it is or how mean it is. And so I'm always doing like check-ins, like, how's that little voice in your head? Like, is it, talking happy thoughts today? And, some days most days it is, but
Yeah.
there has been times that my daughter's like, no, like it's, this so and so happened. So I think just like that also like bringing awareness to, how their self-talk like can affect them.
Yeah, that's so important. And I think if you have children who their inner voice is a little bit meaner than most, I think it's important to talk them through that, so that they don't feel shame of what's wrong with me, what's wrong with my inner voice, why is my inner voice meaner than, my sisters or my cousins or whoever. And I think the way to do that is offer, the thought that, okay, this little voice of yours that's being mean is really trying to protect you. Let's figure out what it's trying to protect you from. My kids at the end of the school year had a talent show. And my both daughters, they signed up. One daughter did the talent show. The other daughter, she pulled out at the last minute. And I asked her why. And she said that she told herself she couldn't do it, that she was going to mess up the words. And she was so disappointed in herself. And so trying to figure out, okay, look, this little voice inside of you that told you you couldn't do it, she's scared is what it is. She was nervous, and that's okay to be scared and to be nervous. You have to remember though that you can do hard things. And so you have another voice in there. You just have to give her that boost of confidence so she's louder than the other voice that's not so nice.
So perfect. I love that example. So amazing. I want to pivot to another area of grief. And obviously, losing a father to suicide changes, I think, a lot for daughters. And I'm sure, for sons as well. But just living this experience, I can attest to it. So, it does change the way you trust men. It changes the way that you see, safety, the way that you mother. It changes the way that you relate to your own body. So, we do, share this loss. And I just want to honor this conversation first and foremost. But from your own, walk through this, like what is the work that has been most pivotal in helping you build like a beautiful, meaningful life alongside your grief?
It definitely changes like every cell in your body for sure. And it's funny because it wasn't until this year when I fully immersed myself in different communities and different healing communities that these things started clicking. Like I recognized that I have allowed myself to stay in relationships in the past for too long out of fear that they would leave. And so that's okay. It was a pattern that I didn't recognize. And it was like, these ex-boyfriends that I had, I stayed in those relationships way too long out of fear that they would leave. And I picked up that if I'm close to somebody, they're going to leave, whether it be by death or like choosing to just end the relationship. So that was something to me that this year I was like, wow, I didn't recognize that that's what I was doing until I allowed myself to experience my grief in a group setting. Prior to the last couple of years, I had been very lone wolf with my grief, even with my own family. I didn't want to pour that grief onto other people because I felt like if this is drowning me, how do I know that it's not going to drown you? And I didn't want to drown anybody. And so allowing myself to be witnessed by other people has been and it has helped me realize that regardless of how or why people are grieving, we're to an extent, all of us are grieving something or somebody, and sharing that connection with others has really just expanded my heart in so many ways. And I feel like the deeper I feel my grief, the more I can love my life.
Yes.
it when I feel like I'm closed off on my grief, when I don't allow myself to express, I have this wall up. So that wall is going to be up for everything. I cannot feel deep amounts of joy if I don't allow myself to feel the deep anger, the deep sadness, everything that grief teaches us. It is really a doorway to expanding like love and happiness and joy, but you can't have one without the other.
And I think, like, in those situations of grief, like, you have the choice to either expand your life or you can drown in it, like you said. And like how you mentioned community, like, I think community has been one of the biggest things for me this year. Like, I feel like I'm healed on a whole different, level now because I have, individuals like yourself that we can just, like, talk openly, like my podcast feelings that I know sometimes that's hard in, talking with even my family at sometimes. Cause like you said, like sometimes I don't know if they even like truly get it or if they think the same way. Like people like have to want to talk about it. But I think finding a community like is such a big piece of this puzzle. Like I have a love-hate relationship. Like I love that it brings, new, individuals into my realm, but also like, I know that there's, bad things too, but like this is what the conversation is today is like you can hold
Yeah.
both at once. But I think community, finding commonality, like talking about how you truly feel and like your authentic self and not performing, like is such a key part of the healing process. Do you agree with that?
100%. I agree that the internet and social media, it has its downfalls, but the upside to it is the truth is there are so many beautifully hearted people that are here to witness and not shame, not judge, not try to rush you through your your process, however you're feeling. There's people who will just sit with you and listen and not try to offer a solution.
And I think exploring different like modalities like hypnotherapy or um, you know, I've done talk therapy and like I loved it. It has a time and place, but I realized like it only brought me to a certain threshold. So like I went into Reiki. I did some hypnotherapy. I did, EF tapping. I've done, multiple modalities. And I think every time, like each one has brought a little bit of something, but I also like made the choice of like, well, that one didn't feel right. I'm not going to go that direction. Like be an exploratory because again, like everybody heals differently, but I just want to promote like, don't always think, talk therapy is the only direction out there for, healing grief. Like get curious with what else is out there because it's been so cool to learn about different, modalities. So,
Yeah, picking and choosing what works for you, I think is so important. So yes, there are so many grief experts out there and healing experts, but there's no one way that's going to work for everybody. That's just not it. So going out and exploring the different modalities and picking up things that you enjoy doing just for the satisfaction of it is so important.
what brings you joy too is also part of the healing.
It really is. That our inner child is begging for more play. And our mom brains are like, well, there's no time for that because I have to do the dishes or the laundry, or those things are still going to be there. If you give yourself 5 minutes to go outside or play with the Play-Doh, your mood is going to instantly boost in ways that nothing else could have helped you do. So finding a moment to play, finding a moment to color. I host grief circles and I try to do activities with the circles. So I had one last week where we did a collage while we're sharing in our grief. And who would have thought like just cutting through magazines and taping and gluing can bring so much happiness with such a heavy conversation, but it's that duality of both. Like the reality is both exist in your life.
I have loved every moment of this conversation. So thank you so much for being here and being so open. Where can my audience find you and what resources do you have available? I'll obviously put it all in the show notes, but I want to allow you some time to speak to everything.
So I'm currently trying to revamp my website and my like link tree, but right now you could just find me on Instagram. It's mourning grief dot house, and the same on TikTok. But once I have my website back up, it'll be relinked in my bios.
Well, thank you again, and we will talk soon.
Thank you so much.